Okay, that explains it.
Yeah, I have three rescue dogs, and my plan was to be in the library this evening, but one of the staff members had an emergency, and so we've been swapping everything around. So I knew that I couldn't be gone 12 hours today, so I had to come home and take care of the monkeys. But they're all traumatized dogs, so their behavior is very erratic.
Oh, no.
Hi, Barbara and Tawny.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good, nice to see you. How are you doing?
Eh, I've been better, but I'm doing all right.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I'm gonna open a window. Hi, Tawny. So we'll get started in just a minute. I'm actually pretty excited about this because I love mysteries. It's like my favorite thing.
Oh, that's good.
It's one of my staff members came up to me the other day and um, she said, do we have two and three of the other, of these books? And I said, oh yeah, I have them on order. And she said, well, do you think you could get that in right away? I've had two people today ask about the second and third books.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's good. That's always a good sign when people finish one and they want to read the others.
Absolutely. And then book 4 will be due out in January, so
Yay. What's the fourth one called?
mainly angst.
Thanks. I'm going to give this to my brother who he's actually a nuclear engineer,
Oh, okay. So
and he's a big reader. So then he works at Seabrook Power Station and has for many, many years. So I'm curious to see what his commentaries would be.
well,
We don't always see eye to eye.
when I was on NPR a few weeks back, I got a call in from the former head of security at Maine Yankee who disagreed with some of the things that I had said about accessibility to a nuclear power plant, but I I would argue with her still because I've had it verified by many people.
Yeah, I listened to that actually. I listened to that recording before our book group, and I brought it up. Like we discussed that.
Yeah, if you noticed, I kept my mouth shut and didn't argue.
Yeah, you did
I
it. You
I
did a good
wasn't going to
job
win
because
that one.
well, it was like it was the first call too. It was like really the first commentary, and she just jumped right in and sort of argumentative, I thought, but
Well, there's a couple potential reasons for that, and one is, I do, if you've read the book, kill the head of security on page 3. So she might have been unhappy with that.
we had a few other people registered, but maybe they're going to keep it. Maybe they're going to watch the recording, so we might as well just dig in and get started. So huge welcome to Matt Cost, author of Mainly Power and several other books. And I noticed I watched the Camden Public Library recording, and you've changed I've noticed you've changed your background so that you've got some other books up there now too. Like the newer one, I think.
Did I have a background for the Camden one? I
You
sort of
did.
did this, but yeah, so maybe I just upgraded it a little bit.
So Matt has had a lot of hats in the past, and I know you're an author now, but you were a bookstore owner and a video store owner and a coach of a variety of sports and a lot of other stuff. But we're most interested in your career as a writer. So I was kind of hoping, I have a bunch of questions, things that people submitted to me, and then things that, as I was watching the NPR recording and some of the other recordings, I jotted down the questions that I wanted answered personally. So if you don't mind, would you mind reading a bit for us, and then we'll ask you some questions?
Absolutely. We can start off with an excerpt that's a few pages in, mainly for variety because, I have been doing a bunch of these Zoom things, and I often start at the very beginning. And but now I'm starting on page 6, which is after the protagonist Langdon and his canine friend Coffee Dog have woken up in the morning and have wrestled a little bit over, food and things like that. And into this comes a phone call. So I'll start there. Into this calm in the eye of the storm came the sudden ring of the phone. Both man and beast froze, for this was truly a strange occurrence. There weren't many calls interrupting them these days, not unless, of course, it was one of those infernal sales machines. It took a pretty lonely person to wait past the recording for that human voice to come on the line trying to sell weed whackers or whatever the heck the item was of the day. But it was too early even for those talking headaches just doing their jobs. This had to be something real. On the 4th ring, Langdon plucked the receiver from the cradle and croaked a greeting in an early morning rasp. "Is this Goff Langdon?" a voice asked sharply, almost derisive in tone. Langdon found himself angry. "Sorry, this is his cleaning lady," he said. "Is this Goff Langdon?" The voice was patient and flat, without emotion. Langdon stirred uneasily in his hardwood chair, wanting suddenly to be free of this moment. "Sure, this is Langdon." There was a pause before the voice continued. "I know where you live." The phone went dead, an insistent buzzing in his head. "Big deal, you jerk off," Langdon said in the silent darkness of the Maine morning into a dead phone. "I'm listed under L in the phone book." Nonetheless, a foreboding of bad things to come filled the kitchen, at least until Coffee Dog reminded him that he was owed canned food for breakfast, and the spell was broken. With the eerie voice resonating in his head, Langdon went about feeding the dog and climbing into the shower. He took an ice cold shower every morning, both to get his blood flowing and to clear the cobwebs from his mind. He never quite rinsed all the shampoo out of his hair. The result was dandruff. He decided he could put off shaving for another day. It was not that he was lazy, not about important things, but rather that he struggled to accomplish what he considered the more mundane chores of life. He was a private detective, bookstore owner, environmentalist, football fan, red meat eater. He voted independent, sometimes Democratic, never Republican. By the time Langdon had made it to his car, he had all but forgotten the early morning call. It was hard to impress, much less frighten, a man who had become disillusioned with life at the tender age of 28. It was late November in Maine, which meant the temperature was somewhere near freezing. Maine was a place of pristine beauty, summer, fall, or winter. There was really no such thing as spring. It was the cold that kept the rest of the United States from moving there. If you could overlook the cold, then there was really no better place to live in the entire world. It was a reasonable enough trade-off, Langdon mused, and he had long been thankful that the climate provided a barrier against the spread of civilization to his backyard. Langdon rode with the top of his convertible down. The car was a Chevy Impala or something like that. He could never quite remember. He did know that it was an early 1970s model. The day was still dark and his hair, still wet from the shower, froze, but he hardly noticed, although he sometimes wondered if this would kill the dandruff. Langdon had never been one to embrace fully the adult requirements of life, but rather appreciated the intrinsic rewards granted to those who had paid attention to what mattered. Like the image of Coffee Dog with his paws balanced on the front windshield as his ears blew backward in the rushing wind. The two of them, man and dog, went directly to the diner, as breakfast was the most important meal of their day. The waitress greeted them both by name, not commenting on any number of things, such as the wind-blown redness of Langdon's face, the icy spikes of his hair, nor the fact that his companion was a dog. They were regulars. "Hey, Langdon, did you catch the game last night?" This from the large woman working the cash register, her ruddy face already warmed by the ovens and beaded with sweat. "Watched it at home with my buddy here. You see Danny T, you tell him he owes me $5. He slid into a booth that overlooked the street and smiled up at the waitress. "Allison, has the paper boy gone and gotten himself sick?" Sorry, Langdon. The gentleman over there has the paper. Without turning his head, Langdon chuckled. What gentleman? You mean Bill? He can't read, so maybe just give him the advertisements from the middle. Maybe the woman's lingerie section to finger through. Normally, this would have caused Allison to blush, but a certain stillness in her face caught his attention. Not Bill, huh? A nod. Probably not even somebody I know would be guest number 2. With deliberate calm, Langdon rotated his head 90 degrees to the left and right smack into the face he'd heard recently. It was the face that went with the cold, derisive tone on the phone earlier this morning. Before the man even opened his mouth, Langdon had no doubt of this. It was like knowing that John Wayne's voice would be gravelly, or that Keanu Reeves would speak like a surfer dude. Sometimes the brain just immediately filled in the blanks, one sense anticipating, as it were, information not yet provided by the others. The man was slender, dainty, even foppish, but by no means soft. His head was narrow, oddly like a banana, protruding slightly at the forehead and the chin. He had no facial hair to speak of, almost as if it had been waxed away. His eyebrows were so sparse and lightly colored that it took careful scrutiny even to see them. He wore a dark jacket and nondescript red tie. The man grinned at Langdon, his smile filling his face, but never reaching his steel gray eyes. Langdon smiled back and said, So I know where you eat your breakfast now, don't I? He waited for a reaction, any change in expression, but was disappointed. Good morning, Mr. Langdon. Coffee dog growled deep in his throat, more a vibration felt in the table than a sound. It would seem that I have taken the paper usually reserved for you. Please accept my apology. Langdon held his gaze. Perhaps you could let me have the sports pages and maybe Calvin and Hobbes. Of course, my dear man, help yourself. The words were polite, but the manner was more of one throwing down the gauntlet, more like the opening move of a game of chess than one side of a polite exchange in public. So this is the meeting of our protagonist, Goff Langdon, and his trusted sidekick, the coffee dog, with the face of the antagonist, if not the actual antagonists themselves, Shakespeare.
I have to say, I like your reading better than the audiobook. I listened to the audiobook and yeah.
Did you?
Your reading
You listened to
is
the
much
entire
better.
thing? I have not actually listened to the entire audiobook. I got a little flavor of it and thought that he did a pretty good job. And I've heard people that liked it. I have heard that the only real mistake that he makes is Bowdoin College.
Oh, yeah.
You notice that?
Yeah, Bowdoin College,
Bowdoin, yeah,
Bowdoin College, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I noticed that. That was funny.
I was surprised he messed that one up and not Topsum.
Yeah, no, he got Thompson right.
Yeah, that's usually a top sham.
So, so we have a bunch of questions. We have some from our group that read the book. And I know one of them asked this question and they're here tonight. So I'm going to ask that one first. In the book, there's a famous author's apartment. Was that based on a real person?
No, it actually was not. That was created. There are a lot of artists and whatnot that come through here. And as a matter of fact, that got downgraded in the heavy kind of duty edits that I did. I think at some point I'll talk about the development of where Mainly Power did indeed come from and how long it took to write and things like that. And I'll answer that more fully. But in some of the heavy edits that I did previously, I had the group first going to an author's home. And then they moved to another location, which was an artist place in the Fort Andros building. And in my edits, I realized it's like, why do I have these two different places? So I just sort of combined them into one and took out a step that was unnecessary and kind of just cluttering my book, if you will. So, long story short is no, that really is no particular person. I might have thought about Jim Harrison in the back of my mind as, writing about the Montana sort of area and whatnot, but not really.
Yeah, that space seemed very real to, I think all of us agreed when we read the book that that place seemed, you really could picture that area, the mill building. And so I think it was sort of fascinating.
Yeah, I guess I've long thought that putting an apartment in that mill building would be pretty fantastic because it is a really cool space with, it has the high ceilings and the big windows and there's plenty of space in there. That people have open businesses and things, but there's still plenty of space left to be had. So I thought that would be a pretty cool apartment. So, but that was all fictional.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
That's such a long answer that it comes with a prologue. The prologue being, really quickly, is fresh out of college back in 1990, I wrote the first draft of a historical book about Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution. And I was inspired by a college professor. I was a history major, and to write this book. And upon completion of this first draft of 120,000 words, I realized three different things. The first being is I really was not a very good writer and that I needed to work on my writing. The second was that I really had to do a lot more research to get to this. And then the third thing was I actually felt that I needed to visit Cuba to make it more authentic and sincere. So I kind of stuck that on a bottom shelf, went off and got a little caught up in life as things happened, opened some businesses, one being the Coffee Dog Bookstore, which is what's going to have inspired Mainly Power, and had a couple kids and things like that. But sort of around 2000, I decided to come back and try my hand at writing again, some 10 years later. And I decided to write mysteries, which has always been a love of mine to read as well. And I decided to base it a little closer to home, which is Brunswick, where I live. And so therefore I was able to be more authentic and sincere on a lot of the things that happen, as opposed to writing about, off in the mountains of Cuba that I really don't even know what the bugs and the brush and the whatnot was like. So I actually wrote I wrote this book back in 2000 and was not able to get it published. I did print a few copies at that point, but I realized that it needed work. And so and I wrote the second one, Mainly Fear, a few years later, actually, and realized the same thing and kind of piled them on that I Am Cuba book in the bottom shelf, and came back and wrote another historical after taking a Maine Humanities Council course in teaching biography in the classroom. I'd moved to teaching, and I self-published that one fully with Amazon and CreateSpace. And finally, in 2016, I got an opportunity to go visit Cuba, and I developed my son and I followed the Revolutionary War trail of Fidel Castro and the guerrillas in the mountains as they traveled through on a 2-week trip, just the two of us, going from guide to guide as we traveled from place to place. And that was pretty incredibly cool. So I was able to finish up rewrite I Am Cuba, which finally brought it to a place that I thought it was pretty good. And I found somebody willing to publish it. And as things go, it usually takes a year to a year and a half from signing a contract to actually getting it published. So at that point, I said, hey, I've also written a couple mystery novels that need a lot of work. If I put the work into those, would you be willing to take a look at it, to the publisher? And they said, sure. So, I kind of tore into the guts of both Mainly Power and Mainly Fear, brought them back. And believe me, they are pretty drastically changed from what they were 20 years ago, including, the author house combining with the artist studio into the fictional is one of the many things that got changed, as well as, cleaner prose and whatnot. And so finally, they loved it, and it got published last September, and the rest just sort of follows. So that's the long version of how long it took me to write.
Well, so I'm going to ask you, this is the big thing that I kept thinking when I read your book was, so how did you find out that you were going to be selected as a Reed Main choice? Because that's quite an honor. And so like Jerry Boyle read your book. Did you know him before, or can you tell us like what your reaction was to that?
They notified my publisher first, and my publisher notified me. So to answer part of your question, I found out from my publisher. I actually, and they thought that I would hear immediately from the Maine Humanities Council, but it turns out it was another 3 or 4 weeks before they got in contact with me about it, touched base on it. So it was my publisher that notified me. In regard to Jerry Boyle, I did not know Jerry Boyle. He might have crossed paths with my stepmother some 30, 40 years ago, because they both worked for the Waterville Morning Sentinel in the Skowhegan office. And so since then, Jerry has said, I think I knew your mother. And I said, oh, that was my stepmother, Jenny. And so he knew her vaguely, but we had never met.
Wow, that's even doubly an honor then, because Jerry Boyle is beloved. And so like when I saw that he was selecting the books, I'm like, yeah, anything Jerry Boyle selects, I'm good with it.
No,
So in the Maine Public Broadcasting interview, they talked to Jerry Boyle about why he selected the things that he selected, and one of the things that he said was that Robert Parker was a huge influence on his writing, and that he saw that you write similarly to Robert Parker, which again is quite a compliment. Which authors influenced you the most, and do you consider Robert Parker one of the authors?
The Maine Sunday Telegram had put a quote on the cover of the book and compared it to Robert Parker and Spencer, Langdon to Spencer. And as well, Jerry said in that interview, which I hadn't known, was that he was very good friends with Robert Parker. And I was extremely jealous of that.
Yeah.
Hopefully at some point I can say that I'm good friends with Jerry Boyle, but I guess I'll never get a chance to say I'm good friends with Robert Parker.
Yeah.
But he certainly influenced me. And, I guess the influences start at a young age with the Hardy Boys. I love the Hardy Boy mystery novels. I like the Bobbsey twins and the Nancy Drew mysteries and the Great Brain, and, working my way up through as, worldwide authors that have influenced me greatly. Certainly Robert Parker, but as well, a little lighter in tone, and I try and bring this color into my books as well, would be Carl Hiaasen and Elmore Leonard.
Oh, yeah.
They're both very colorful and flamboyant mystery writers that I enjoy. As far as the historicals, Jeff Shara writes some Civil War things and World War II things that are pretty fantastic. Over the last couple years, I've found myself, I don't know if mired is the right word because it connotates bad, but I've become very involved with a lot of Maine mystery writers, which has been pretty fantastic. So, I haven't got out of, I've found all these Maine mystery writers like Bruce Robert Coffin, Joseph Souza, that Jerry Boyle, that Paul Doran, who
Yeah.
have written all these books, and that I've behind on. So I'm working on them, and then I've also become enamored with a few other authors that my publisher publishes, that I've been reading, kind of working my way through their books. Kevin St. Jar, who's from Maine, and a couple others, B.J. Magnani, and S. Lee Manning, to name a few. So, between the main authors and, other authors of my publisher, it's kept me busy reading.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have also written a lot. You've also written historical fiction. Can you tell us about your other books?
Should I start with my other mysteries or go to historicals? Which one were you wanting?
If you want to tell us about your other mysteries, and then we'll go, because your next one is another historical fiction, correct? You're the one that's coming out.
I'm pretty
So if you want to end with that one.
confusing on what the next one is. I actually had a new mystery series debut about 2-3 weeks ago with Wolf Trap, which came out on June 23rd. And the protagonist is Clay Wolf. And I set this in a fictional coastal Maine town. One of the things, that I've run into writing my mainly mystery series is, some problems are, with it being based in a real place and people wondering if this thing is that thing, much like your question about, was it a real author that you wrote about in the Fort Andros? And, it's like, no, and it bogs it down a little on occasion, and a few other things. So I said, let's try a fictional town. So I created the fictional town of Port Essex, and came out with Wolf Trap, which is about smuggling heroin through lobster traps in this fictional Maine town. And I've actually under contract for books 2 and 3 on that one as well. So the second one, Mine Trap, which is a cult threatening a small coastal Maine town, comes out in October. And then in next April will be Mousetrap, which is about genetic engineering and genome engineering, and the practice of being able to create superior human beings. And that happens in Port Essex too. It's a very busy place.
Sounds like a neat series too.
What's that?
That sounds like a neat series too.
Yeah,
I love all Maine mysteries.
yeah, it came out with a bang. It got a lot of really great reviews on Wolf Trap, and seems to be doing very well. So it's got a warm reception. I'm sure, getting the Read Me book of the fiction book of the year has helped a lot of things, but everything's snowballing along pretty well.
So let's see. Sorry, if I look distracted, one of my dogs just threw up. I'm like, seriously, every Zoom meeting there's something. So I'm very distracted at the moment. But
I do have 3 dogs behind me as well who are all asleep. So hopefully your dogs don't start barking and wake mine up.
one of them, I don't know what's right. Yeah, he's over there. He's not doing very well. So where do you get most of your ideas? What?
Do you need to go take care of your dog? And I can just.
I might need to in a minute. He was sick when I was at work because I came home to a giant mess, and now I know which one it is.
If you want, I can talk about my historicals for a little bit while you go tend to your dog.
That would be fantastic. I'm just going to put it on mute for just a sec.
Okay. So to talk about my historicals a little bit, too bad she's going to miss all this exciting stuff. But I did talk about I Am Cuba, which recently won a Cops Featherling Silver Award that just came out last March, March 6th. So it timed itself pretty well with the onset of the pandemic. Um, so this is my first traditionally published book, and everything kind of closed down on me, which was unfortunate. The worst part is up here in Brunswick, we have a sister city in Cuba. And so we have a Cuba week each year that was happening in March. So I was going to have my grand opening at this Cuba week, which gets a huge turnout. I bought 100 stress balls to give out at my presentation and talk, and they're still sitting in my mudroom. I think I've got rid of 11 of them now. I guess if it had happened 2 weeks earlier, that at least everybody would have had a stress ball for the past year to year and a half to get themselves through the pandemic. But that was not actually my first traditionally published. That was my first traditionally, but prior to that, I wrote a historical about Joshua Chamberlain and the Civil War at Every Hazard. And one of the reasons for having done that one is Joshua Chamberlain lived the bulk of his life here in Brunswick. So it gave me, again, one of those opportunities to research and work on something a little closer to home than Cuba was. And so I self-published that in 2015. And that's done fairly well and got a lot of good reviews. And so just recently, I wrote not really a follow-up to that, because in my historical fiction books, both the Cuba one and the Joshua Chamberlain one, I use a fictional character to cast a light on the protagonist, Fidel and Joshua. And this fictional character, I felt, allowed me to throw more reality onto who they were. A lot of what we know about Fidel Castro, we got from Fidel Castro's carefully manipulated version of the truth. Or the other side of it is the exiles living in Florida who absolutely hate Fidel Castro. So I think the reality actually comes somewhere in the middle there, which between them. And so in that book, my character, Vicente, is able, I think, to draw that middle line and find more of the truth in what is being said. And I used a similar thing with Emmett Collins, because almost everything we know about Joshua Chamberlain came from his writing, because he wrote a lot and he really put a good spin on who he was. And he did many fantastic things, and I think he is a great man, but there were some pitfalls to his character as well. So using the fictional character of Emmett Collins, I felt it was helpful to do that. And so I decided to write another historical following it up and going to New Orleans after the Civil War and the fight for social equality and political equality. And I bring my fictional character, Emmett Collins, from the Joshua Chamberlain book, who's now grown into a man. He was a young aide to Joshua Chamberlain. Now he's grown into a man, and he goes first to work for the Freedmen Bureau down in New Orleans. And then he becomes part of the Metropolitan Police and is tasked with hunting down a serial killer. And the serial killer, well, really it's just a murderer, because they weren't called serial killers yet. But so he's tasked with hunting down a murderer. And that's just sort of one of the themes. And there's a love story theme, but these kind of just weave their way through this really difficult time when the struggle for social and political equality was going on. And it's a very gritty book in many ways. And but it's also got this underlying theme of hope, or which kind of describes the title, Love in a Time of Hate. And so those are the overall themes that we work with. And there's a very dark time where there actually social equality was almost realized. One, I think the thing that best represents this is in 1872, Louisiana had the first Black governor, in the United States. Uh, Pinky Stewart Pinchback. So in 1872, he becomes the first Black governor in the United States. And it won't be for until 1989 that there will be another Black governor in the United States. So it just sort of showcases how close this social and political equality was to being realized right there in New Orleans. In my book takes place in 1866 to 1874, and it delves into the politics and the fight really between, the white supremacists who are trying to reclaim the old ways and there's street battles and murderers on the street, and it's a tough book, but it's a lot of parallels to today. So that's coming out in August 25th, Love in a Time of Hate. And hopefully your dog's fine. We'll go back to you.
Yeah, I think so. I think he feels a little better now. He started chasing his tail immediately after, so I guess that's a good sign. I think the most important question of the evening is tell us about your 3 dogs.
Well, my wife and I have a chocolate lab who is the follower to the coffee dog. And if you get to book 3, Mainly Money, which I guess I should point out because I wrote that just a couple years ago, we're going to jump 20 years in Langdon's life from book 2, Mainly Fear, to book 3, Mainly Money. And so the coffee dog is no longer. The coffee dog had been a real character and was my dog, so the only real character in the book. And in book 3, Mainly Money, there is one real character as well. His name is just plain Dog. So there's a chocolate lab named Dog, and we also have a basset hound named Whimsy. And we got them at the same time almost 10 years ago. So they're coming up on 10, and we're convinced that they think they look like each other because that's all they've ever seen is each other. So Dog thinks he looks like a basset hound and vice versa. My stepdaughter has been home for the past year with her Chihuahua. So we now have added a Chihuahua to the Basset Hound Labrador mix.
I have one that looks like a Basset and a Rottweiler combined.
That's quite
and mine are all foster fails, like, dogs no one wanted. And so she's called New Dog because I just kept saying, I'm not going to name her because I'm not going to keep her. So I'm just going to refer to her as the New Dog. And that was 10 years ago. So
we're pretty close, New Dog and Dog. I'm formulating a cross between my historicals and my mysteries in my mind. I'm thinking about writing a book that's going to be based in Brooklyn, and the character's name is going to be 8 Ballot, and his name is 8 because his parents couldn't come up with a new name after the first seven children, so they just called him 8.
That's awesome.
Planned on changing that, but it ended up on the birth certificate and it just stuck. So.
That's great. It's interesting that you were talking about Carl Hiaasen, because now that you say that, yeah, I can see that. Like I hadn't thought of it because once Jerry Boyle mentioned Robert Parker, I was like, oh, that genre fits. There's this sort of, Spencer style detective for sure. But that's funny about Carl Hiaasen. So, yeah.
I think he's a lot like Spencer, but Spencer's, a man's kind of man, and Langdon's a little fumbly-bumbly and a little, silly, if you will, almost, not taking himself quite so seriously. And I think Spencer kind of takes himself pretty seriously.
Yeah, for sure. But you know what, I must say, one of the things that I really enjoyed, and it came up at book group, was the relationship that Goff had with his daughter. And, you know, some of the relationships that develop in the book. But especially the father-daughter relationship, I think was the one that most of the readers really enjoyed the most. So was that based on your relationship with your children, do you think? Are you Goff?
You know, I, one of the reasons to write the new series is I confuse things for sure because my middle name is Langdon. And so therefore, but there are pieces of me that are Goff Langdon, but I'm most certainly not Goff Langdon. But there are pieces of Missouri who are my daughter, who was a similar age when I wrote it, but certainly not all of her. But I, did delve into, as I sort of said, I was really trying to write about what I knew because of the Cuba, problem of not really feeling the sincerity. So I decided to give Goff Langdon some of my characteristics, but also to give Goff Langdon a daughter who was my daughter's age at the time, so that I felt like I could really write realistically about a relationship between a father and daughter.
Yeah, I actually really appreciated the relationship between Shabal
The ball.
and Goff as well, because I worked in an indie bookstore in Farmington for years, and it was just me and the owner, Kenny Bruckner.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I used to say, like you really do. It's just the two of you. You develop these really strong relationships with, that are based on work, obviously, but you end up being very close. And I thought that really came through in the bookstore as well. I think she was one of my favorite characters. I really liked her a lot.
Well, she sticks around, so I'll try not to give anything away, but
Yeah, don't give it away. I'm waiting for the other two to come out on audio. They're not on audio yet, which is always frustrating. I go one after the other, especially when I'm listening. So I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to like read, not listen, read.
yeah, I'm not sure when the audio date will be. It's my publisher does it through this company called Orange Sky, who kind of buys the rights to it. And so I think they're going to sort of wait for it to have been out a year and review, how sales were before they decide to go on to a second one. And they didn't
So
bring
I'll
it
have to
out on
definitely.
audio until March. So
So I'll have to read them because I can't wait that long.
well, we certainly have to get you busy because, I do have, as I said, the fourth one, Mainly Angst, coming out. And I have the fourth Clay Wolf Port Essex almost done. I'm coming into the final stages of the first draft. So there's, months of editing to be done after that. But that should be coming out late summer, early fall of next year.
So are you going to continue with the series, with the Goff Langdon series?
I think so, like I said, I have the fourth one that is coming out. And I don't think I'm done with them yet, but I do want to bounce around and do some different things. So, now I have two series going, plus I still want to write some historicals. And as I told you, I was, working on an idea that I'll probably start writing after I finish this one about a 1920s, PI in Brooklyn called 8 Below or Ballo.
I'm looking forward to that one. So
I was tentatively going to call that one Brooklyn Woke. And I was going to have him sort of be a woke detective before his time. But I ran that idea by my daughter, who lives in Brooklyn, about a month ago. And she said, oh, that's so past. You can't call it that. so I was just kind of showing my age, I guess. so now I'm back to, coming up with a title, but I'm sure one will come as I get started.
So what is your writing process? Do you get up in the morning and write for 3 hours? Like there's a lot of authors that have this like writing process. Do you have a writing process?
Um, it's very similar to that. You're pretty much right on. I get up in the morning and after reading the paper, I sit down with my second cup of coffee at the computer and I write. And you know, 3 hours would probably be about normal for the start of the day, and then I'll do some other things. And then if I'm not editing, marketing, promoting, or working on some other thing, I'll come back to writing in the afternoon. But often one of those things will kind of replace the afternoon. But my best time of writing is in the morning when I'm fresh and with a cup of coffee and all of that. And I do that every day, 7 days a week. So,
Wow, that's
I,
neat.
and I'm thinking I'm going to lighten up on that at some point, but that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And I sort of got my foot in the cracked door right now, so I want to keep it going. And I've found that that's by far the most effective way, because if I take a few days off, even a day, I kind of lose track of where I am, and then I have to restart the engine. And when I'm writing every single day, if I say I write from 7 to 11 in the morning, the rest of the day I'm thinking about where it's going to go the next day. So that when I sit down at 7 o'clock in the morning to write, I'm ready to go. I know where I'm going with it. And I write for another 4 hours, and then I spend the rest of the day thinking about where I'm going to go. So it just gets a nice rhythm going. And if you crack that rhythm, then you kind of have to, restart the car.
Now, do you have anybody that you bounce your ideas off? Do you let them read things early, or do you wait until it's done and then edit from there?
I have one early reader. He's an old guy that lives above my garage that sometimes I call Dad. So we share a newspaper as well. So I read the paper in the morning, and if I've finished a chapter, I include the chapter in the newspaper that I roll up and throw up on his deck outside of his efficiency above my garage. And he kind of weighs in, and it's not, a dot the I's, cross the T's sort of thing. That early reader is the one that says, I have no idea what's going on. You have to be more clear, or you're boring me to death. And he has no problem telling me these things. So he's the perfect one to do it. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, I sent up a chapter, and I can't tell you what he said, but he sent me a text that said the same thing 3 times, and it was a curse insult at me. So, but that I took as a good thing, because it was a twist that threw him for a loop and made him angry.
That's awesome. When your next book comes out, we'll have you back, and you have to have your dad with you.
Okay.
He could be he could be part of our interview. That would be awesome.
We're going to have to do it live, because this technology would throw him for a loop.
Yeah, we're hoping to do that soon, but
yeah.
Well, I'm going to open it up to just see if anybody has any questions, and if they don't, Tawny or Barbara, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask? Feel free to unmute if you do, or.
I was just curious, and you might have kind of alluded to this, but why you had Langdon, why was he, so he was 28 years old. And I guess as I was reading it, I kept trying to make him a little bit older and forgetting that he was 28. But anyway, I was just curious, like, why you chose to make him 28.
And I've heard this from a few other people, and the confusion I think that people might associate with it is the time period that it took me to get it published. Because when I wrote it, I was 28.
Okay.
So and a lot of it is me. And so I was kind of, again, writing about what I knew. And so the parts that are me is trying to explain what a 28-year-old, going through something like this might be doing and be like. And so there's too much of me in it. So now that this book comes out in 2020, when I'm 50, it has confused some people. So, and so the same thing follows through with Mainly Fear. And then we catch up to my actual age and Mainly Money in the third book. So that, if
That's
that
kind
made
of what I
sense to you.
thought from what you had said, but I wasn't entirely. You didn't exactly say that, but you had alluded kind of to that. So
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions?
Tawny's commenting that all the characters seem mid-40. So we kind of agreed with that. And I've heard that from other people. You know, some of the other characters are a little older. Jimmy 4x4 and Bart and Richum are all a little older. Langdon's kind of the younger one of the group.
Yeah, we should all, we were all kind of upset that you killed off Peppermint Patty.
I was making sure everybody had read it here before
Yeah,
I
we've all read
got
it.
into that one. But
Oh
you know,
yeah, this is going to be recorded. Okay, spoiler alert. Just pretend you didn't hear that. It's like if you're watching it on recording.
I have got hate mail in regard to that and death threats. So that's in every book I've written. Even the people that really hate me glorifying some of the things that Fidel Castro did. Nobody's disliked me so much as for doing that to Peppermint Patty.
Yeah, I liked Peppermint Patty.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
She's a great character. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think this is a really great start to a series, and I'm really looking forward to reading the others. I wish they were all available in audio because I like to just binge them all at once, and so it was kind of frustrating to get to the end. But I guess I'll have to sit down and read them.
Well,
I
certainly.
love listening.
Thank you for having me, and feel free to email Orange Sky Audio and say, hey, you need these books brought out, books 2 and 3 on audio.
Yeah, maybe I will. I definitely will, because I was really thrilled. Like I brought the book home and I started reading it, and then one day I noticed it on Audible, and I was like, yes, these are in Audible. So then I finished it and I went to look for the next one, and I'm like, okay, maybe it'll just be a little bit of a delay, but I hear March, and that's very disconcerting.
And that's not a sure thing. So, but I'm sure a librarian's voice with Find a Way Orange Sky would not hurt, and I'd love for it to be out on audio as well. So
yeah, well, I will send that along for sure then. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks everyone, and I hope that anybody that sees this as a recording will forgive my dog for getting sick in the middle of
fantastic. And did you want to say something, Barbara?
Oh, I was just gonna say I have a friend who's blind, and so he has to have we're always giving each other book ideas, and so it's frustrating when I can't give him a book idea because it's not accessible to him.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope all my books find it to audio.
Yes, it would be great. I think you should read them though.
I
put that in my suggestion.
I can, yeah, you put that in your suggestion.
Usually I don't like, some authors, I really like it when they read it and sometimes not, but when you were reading it, I'm like, oh, the intonation is perfect.
Oh, good.
So I'll put that in as a suggestion.
There you go.
It was so nice meeting you, and thanks for sharing your books with us. Congratulations on being the fiction book of the year. That's very exciting. And we'll be looking forward to your other titles as they come out.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming both.
Yes. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.